I was drowning in my own lungs when my sister ripped the oxygen tube from my face. "Stop faking it," Brittany hissed, her manicured nails scratching my cheek as she yanked the plastic away. "You just want pity." The air vanished instantly. My chest collapsed inward, feeling like a crushed soda can. I clawed desperately at the empty space where the mask had been. My vision, swimming with black spots. My throat producing strangled sounds I didn't recognize. Desperate. Animal gasps echoed off the high, sterile walls of the pulmonary rehabilitation unit in Salt Lake City. My parents, Gerald and Karen, stood barely 3 feet away. They said nothing. My mother crossed her arms, a look of profound annoyance settling on her face. My father simply stared at his phone. I reached toward them, my hand trembling, begging without words. "Help me, please. I'm your daughter, too." Brittany rolled her eyes. "See, she's fine. Just dramatic. As always." What none of them knew, what would unravel everything they believed about our family, was that Christopher, the physical therapist, was standing right behind them in the doorway. And 2 weeks later, at my grandfather's will reading, he would place his hand on my sister's shoulder and speak 6 words that would destroy her entire world. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your family? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who should have protected you, just to finally protect yourself? Please share your story in the comments below. It was like a switch had been flipped inside me from panic to precision. My mind didn't descend into despair or fear. It ascended to a cold, analytical space. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a corrective procedure. My name is Laura. I'm 34 years old. An environmental engineer, based in Salt Lake City. I manage my complex respiratory condition with the same rigorous discipline I apply to my career. None of my family knew any of this, because none of them ever thought to ask. My success in Denver and Salt Lake City, my condo, my career, it was all invisible to them. I had been their invisible daughter since the day Brittany was born. 2 years after me. Brittany was the delicate one. I was expected to be self-sufficient and undemanding. She needed constant protection from a world that might bruise her precious feelings. I was expected to handle whatever life threw at me without complaint. My mother, Karen, had always loved a project. And Brittany, with her gambling debt of nearly $450, 000, and her constant need for rescue, was the ultimate project. She saw my grandfather's will as her only lifeline. When Brittany ripped the BiPAP machine from my face, my first thought wasn't, "I might die." It was, "I'm not worth the trouble of her having to pretend to care." That silence from my parents was the final signature on a 3-decade-long contract they had all agreed to. Laura is the spare. Emotion is just bad data in my system. I deleted it. My silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. It was the learned helplessness of a person trapped in a quiet emotional prison. When you are constantly punished for speaking up, you learn to choose silence. You become adept at minimizing your pain to avoid provoking your captors. You don't try to escape, you just survive the days. They saw my passivity as compliance. I saw it as a calculated expense. I was paying for peace with my presence and my silence. This was the ultimate cost of my belonging. A wave of humiliation, far colder than the dry air of the recovery room, swept over me. This emotional transaction had just been forcibly upgraded without my consent. It was then that Christopher, the physical therapist, stepped fully into the room. His presence didn't feel emotional. It felt clinical and professional. He saw the immediate, lethal damage Brittany had inflicted. And he moved. He efficiently restored the airflow, checked my monitors, and looked at my sister. His eyes utterly cold. "What did you just do?" he asked. His voice wasn't accusatory. It was a demand for a factual statement. Brittany stammered something about the tube being loose, resorting to her favorite tactic, gaslighting. But I saw a flicker in Christopher's eyes that told me this wasn't the first time he'd witnessed calculated cruelty in my family. Christopher looked at my parents, who were now pretending to examine the view outside the window. "I need you all to leave," he instructed, his tone allowing no debate. "The patient requires immediate uninterrupted stabilization. And when he looked at Brittany, his voice dropped to a pitch that was perfectly level, yet utterly final. You, he said, will leave first. Brittany, unused to such blunt, unyielding authority, grabbed her designer purse and stormed out, muttering something about the ungrateful getting all the attention. My parents followed, offering a week we'll call later over their shoulders. They were running from the mess, not the cruelty. I lay there, the air finally filling my lungs, and thought the contract is broken. It's time for a new accounting. The next morning, after the required rounds were done, Christopher returned. He pulled a chair close to my bedside and sat down with a quiet gravity that was utterly unlike my family. He didn't ask how I felt physically. He asked, "How does it feel to be seen?" "I feel like I'm reviewing an unfamiliar environmental report," I managed to say. The answer surprising even me. "I don't know who to trust." He nodded slowly. "Trust the facts. I'm here because of the facts. And because of Thomas." He explained that he hadn't been just a physical therapist at the clinic. He was also the care specialist for my grandfather, Thomas. During his final 5 years, they had talked often not just about health, but about the people Thomas loved, and the people who worried him. My name, he said, came up constantly. Thomas knew about my lung condition. He knew my childhood home was now the Salt Lake City area, and he knew I might need medical care there someday. 3 years ago, Thomas made an unusual request, handing Christopher a letter to be opened only if I ever ended up needing care in this region. He said something I won't forget, Christopher recalled, his voice tinged with quiet sadness. "Laura is the granddaughter my family forgot. She has no one in her corner." Thomas, a man of quiet dignity and immense wealth, had been paralyzed by regret. He hadn't waited to act because he was strong. He waited because he was afraid. He was terrified of destroying his family's facade, afraid of his own children's reaction, afraid of being alone in his final years. He was trapped by the emotional slavery of keeping the peace. Even when that peace was slowly killing me, he didn't confront the cruelty directly because he hoped his love for me, his secret admiration, would somehow be enough. It wasn't. But he chose to prepare a backup plan for my survival instead of tearing the family apart while he was alive. The burden of the hero, I realized, is often the guilt of inaction. Christopher continued, telling me how Thomas had been quietly assembling evidence for 2 years. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a worn, leather-bound portfolio. Inside were newspaper clippings and industry publication articles all about my career in environmental engineering. I stared at them, my breath catching. One article detailed how my consulting work had helped a regional hospital secure crucial funding. Another featured an interview where I discussed efficiency strategies for large medical centers. In the margins, in the familiar, shaky hand I remembered from birthday cards long ago, Thomas had written, "My granddaughter did this. So proud of her. She built this life completely on her own." I couldn't stop the tears. For 34 years, I believed no one in my family saw me. My professional success was a fact. Yet it was invisible to the people who mattered. Now, I held proof that the one person who mattered most had been watching and adoring me all along. He was prepared for everything, Christopher said, handing me a small, sealed envelope that Thomas had instructed him to deliver. He knew what was coming, and he made sure you wouldn't face it alone. I opened the envelope. Inside was a crisp, legal document. Thomas had authorized Christopher to officially inform his longtime attorney about any potential mistreatment and instruct the lawyer to proceed with the legal reading of the final will immediately, adding Christopher as a key witness to the proceedings. The war had officially begun, and I was going to fight it with Thomas's facts and precision. Everything in the legal file pointed to Brittany's desperation. Thomas had learned about her immense gambling debt, $450. 000. She saw the inheritance as her only way out. Her desperate cruelty toward me was purely transactional. I was an obstacle to a vital financial resource. But the plot deepened when Jessica, the head nurse, walked into my room with a solemn expression. She closed the door and spoke in a low voice. She had been on duty at Thomas's home 2 weeks before he passed, when he was receiving specialized post-surgical care. She confirmed what Christopher had only suspected. Brittany had been alone with Thomas on 2 separate occasions that week. On the second visit, Thomas had suffered a severe respiratory episode. Jessica had rushed in and noticed the BiPAP equipment had been disconnected. It was easily dismissed as a technical malfunction at the time. But after witnessing the attack on me, Jessica now had a terrible, cold clarity. I reported it to my supervisor. Jessica whispered. But they said, things happen. But after what I saw in here, I know something wasn't right. The air thickened with dread. It was no longer about a broken relationship or a greedy sister. It was about potential murder by calculated negligence. This revelation turned the family drama into a moral and criminal catastrophe. The same day, my parents, Gerald and Karen, launched their predictable defense. They took to social media, posting vague statuses about family drama and the tragedy of an unstable child, insinuating I was having a mental breakdown and destroying Thomas's legacy. This was their standard deflection, designed to silence and isolate me. However, Thomas's preparatory work was about to turn their defense lethal. Christopher informed me that one of the articles Thomas had collected was not about my career, but about a small local stock fraud case that my father, Gerald, was involved in years ago. It had been buried under a mountain of paperwork, but Thomas had preserved the key evidence. Then came a twist colder than the last. My parents hadn't just been passively neglectful, they had been actively complicit. They were the architects of a secret plan to pressure Thomas to change his will to their benefit, possibly using Brittany's debt and Thomas's deteriorating health as leverage. The family was a meticulously coordinated syndicate of deception. Brittany was just the predictable, desperate face of their deeper, structural corruption. My anger was no longer personal, it was clinical. I felt nothing but utter contempt for the transactional nature of their lives. It was time for the final accounting. Christopher was already setting up a meeting with Thomas's lawyer. The rules of engagement had changed from emotional survival to total strategic warfare. The day of the will reading felt less like a private family gathering and more like a carefully engineered corporate takeover. I arrived at Thomas Reed's law office, utterly composed. I was wearing my best business suit, my face calm, my eyes clear. I was no longer the victim. I was the executioner of consequence. As I walked in, I was followed by Christopher and Jessica. My parents and Brittany were already seated. A united front of anxiety. Brittany was pale, but quickly regained her arrogance. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Brittany demanded, her voice sharp. "I demand these strangers be removed from our private family matter." Thomas Reed, a man whose 40 years of friendship with my grandfather granted him unimpeachable authority, merely adjusted his reading glasses. "On the contrary, Ms. Brittany, Mr. Thomas Warren specifically requested the presence of Mr. Christopher and Ms. Jessica as witnesses to these proceedings." Reed began reading the main will. The room went silent. The primary asset, the principal mountain retreat center, and its surrounding estate, valued at nearly $1. $2 million was divided. Brittany's name was omitted entirely. Instead, my parents, Gerald and Karen, were left a nominal sum, which Reed read with precise, cutting clarity. A necessary expense for the long-term professional psychological care the beneficiaries require. It was a public, final humiliation disguised as mercy. Brittany screamed that it was a mistake. My parents were furious, leaning forward to argue. Reed silenced them all by moving to the second document, the codicil to the will. The codicil reserves a final distribution specifically for Laura Warren. Reed read aloud, detailing a healthcare trust fund of $300,000, designated solely for my respiratory treatment. Then came the Mountain Retreat Center, worth $850, left entirely to me. "This is the place," the codicil read, "where she can finally breathe freely." Brittany's composure shattered. Her gambling debt was still unpaid. Her lifeline was gone. Gerald and Karen looked like the ground had opened beneath them. They began to plead that they couldn't afford their mounting legal debts from the failed stock scheme. They were reduced to beggars at the feet of the daughter they had scorned. The moment for their true public reckoning had arrived. Gerald and Karen, desperate, resorted to their final, most pathetic tactic: guilt. They tearfully asked me, their successful engineer, daughter, for a temporary loan to cover their legal debts, claiming family is blood and appealing to my past generosity. We just need time, Gerald pleaded, his voice breaking. We're losing everything. I simply waited until he was done. Then, Thomas Reed nodded to Christopher. Christopher stood, walked slowly across the polished mahogany floor, and stopped directly in front of Brittany. Her face was a mask of hatred and terror. The room was absolutely silent. Christopher leaned in, his voice measured and professional, but carrying the full weight of truth. I saw what you did, Brittany. The words hit her like a physical blow. She erupted, screaming that I had set her up, that I was paying the witnesses, that she was sorry but she was stressed. She fell to her knees, grabbing my hands, begging me not to pursue the legal claim of assault or the criminal charges of negligence that Christopher and Jessica had documented. My parents watched this spectacle of their golden child reduced to a groveling debtor and a proven criminal. They realized, too late, that their entire version of reality had been a lie. But the fatal blow came from me. I gently pulled my hands away. I looked at Brittany, then at Gerald and Karen. I will not sue you, I stated, my voice calm. I will not press charges. I will not let you be the subject of my time any longer. Brittany's face lit up with a flash of grateful relief, but I held up a decisive hand for silence. My decision has nothing to do with forgiveness, and nothing to do with mercy, I continued, the words measured and final. It has to do with accounting. You have taken enough from me. You took my peace, my sense of belonging, and 34 years of believing I was worthy of love. You will not take my future peace as well. I refuse to spend another day carrying the burden of resentment toward you. This wasn't about them. It was about me. The highest form of retribution is self-liberation. I refuse to let their toxicity be the script of my life. From this day forward, I concluded, looking directly at Brittany, you are no longer my sister. You are a stranger. I want no contact. You will face your debts alone. Your consequences start now, and they will never expire. I looked at Gerald and Karen. I will establish the boundaries that should have been there 30 years ago. If you want me in your lives, you will have to prove it through consistent, unconditional actions over time. But the days of me being your transactional resource are over. Goodbye. I walked out, leaving my shattered family staring at the carpet, finally facing the reality of their own moral bankruptcy. The divorce from my biological family was final and decisive. I had purchased my peace with the courage of a single choice. I immediately transferred the Mountain Retreat Center, a serene estate nestled in the Wasatch Range, into a nonprofit. I established the Thomas Warren Center for Respiratory Healing, dedicating the property and the $300,000 endowment to pulmonary rehabilitation, helping those with chronic respiratory conditions recover, breathe freely, and find community. I would serve as the center's executive director, applying my engineering and consulting skills to a purpose that mattered. My father, Gerald, and my mother, Karen, were publicly disgraced by the stock fraud revelations and their malicious neglect. They were socially ostracized from their community, lost all their influence, and were left financially ruined, reduced to working low-paying jobs that provided no status for Gerald and no creative outlets for Karen. Brittany quickly lost her fragile support system and now faced the full $450,000 debt alone. My peace, meanwhile, was absolute. I woke up in the quiet stillness of the mountains, surrounded by towering pines and the clean, cold air that my lungs welcomed like a healing gift. I began writing a memoir, not for revenge, but because I knew there were other women who had spent their lives feeling invisible, and who needed to know that survival was possible. One quiet afternoon, I sat on my new balcony, overlooking the vast, beautiful mountains. Christopher, now a trusted friend, handed me the final letter Thomas had intended only for me. To everyone who has ever felt like the invisible one in their family, you are not alone. Your worth is not a contract written in blood. It is a universal truth. Your worth is not defined by whether your family chooses to see it. It is defined by your courage, your resilience, and your dignity. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply say, "Me, too," and let someone else know they are not alone in their pain. The light has found you at last. Step into it and never look back. I closed the letter, letting the tears fall onto the precious paper. The financial cost of their cruelty was immense, but the true cost was the loss of their dignity, their reputation, and their peace. My reward was the opposite: freedom, purpose, and visibility. If Laura's story touched your heart today, please share this video. And I want to hear from you now. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your family? Have you ever had to walk away from people who should have protected you in order to finally protect yourself? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter. And there are thousands of other women watching this video who need to know they are not the only ones who have felt this way.